My team, kinda power. I love the power. I love the power.
Hi and welcome to the BigFooty Port Adelaide podcast, a weekly show dedicated to talking all things Port Adelaide. I'm Enviable Tradition. This week I'm joined by Macca 19. G'day, buddy.
How's things, mate? Good to have you back.
Yeah, good to be back, mate. Good to be back in the seat again. And we've got a special guest on today. You all know him. He's been the moderator of the Port Adelaide BigFooty board for the last 6 years, and it's Ford Fairlane. Welcome, mate.
Yo, Snapperheads. And that is the last Ford Fairlane impersonation I'm going to attempt tonight. I knew there was at least one popular request for it. So.
Honestly, I was just talking to Macca before we came on air, and my parents had a Ford Fairlane when I was a little kid, and it was the worst car I've ever experienced in my life, and every time I see your name, it just reminds me of it. So just thought I'd let you know.
I'm sorry, we'll put in some for therapy for you.
So, Ford, you know we like to start this show by letting people introduce themselves a little bit and tell us about their history with Port Adelaide, and we'd love to know about yours, mate. How did you become to be a fan of this great club?
This is a difficult question to answer, and it's been a family mystery, I think, since, or along the lines of the Bermuda Triangle or the Marie Celeste. I think I'm a first-generation Australian. My parents were European immigrants to Australia. My dad barracked for North Adelaide because he lived in the area when he settled here. And I, for some reason, became a Port supporter. He blamed his brother, who also came out, who was a red-hot Port supporter. He would go to Smith's of Port Adelaide to buy his cars, and he was really dedicated to Port. But I don't know whether that was his doing. I like to think that I was just born to barrack for Port. I think there's a Port gene out there in the world. I know Russell Ebert Hamble likes to talk about all the Port supporters that have spread out from Adelaide around the world, and he likens it to the Pittsburgh Steelers and their fans leaving the Steel City and going all out over America. And I think Port supporters are the same, and there's a gene out there. Otherwise, I suspect it might have had something to do with school friends, and I lived in Murray Bridge as a young fella, and I think there were two teams you supported in Murray Bridge, and it was either Sturt or Port, and I fell in with the Port crowd. And I think you just brought up on the traditions and the history of the club. I mean, back then, TV, I think we had one channel, and we didn't get replays, and our knowledge of football was confined to what you read in the paper and watching the scores at the bottom of the Saturday afternoon movie. But you'd always hear about the legend of Foss Williams and the tradition of Port Adelaide that they never gave up. And I know that's what Ken Hinckley's certainly preaching at the moment, and that it was just this club that had this immense aura about it. And I think you just couldn't help but be drawn into it. And certainly when we moved to the city and I started to get to be able to go to games and just became such a dedicated follower, and I certainly remember my dad saying to me on a number of occasions, if only you worked as hard on your schoolwork as you did at knowing who all those Port Adelaide players are. So that's probably my story.
Beautiful. So Murray Bridge has given us not only Chad Wingard, but also Ford Fairlane. And
apparently
I guess we can leave it up to the listeners to decide which of those is the more significant one. But obviously, look, it wasn't a great week for the club this week. Went down to Fremantle at Patterson Stadium by 74 points, which is a pretty big loss. And the Maggies went down to Sturt at Alberton, which always hurts, by 7 points as well. So we might jump straight into our love-hate for the week. And Macca, you might like to start by telling us your love and your hate for the week, mate.
Sure, my love is the Prison Bar Guernsey that we all purchased earlier this year. And it arrived at my doorstep on Tuesday morning, and what a bloody great thing it is. It's got my name on it, once on the front, once on the back. I certainly didn't pay for it twice, but it's on there twice, so that's a good thing. It's in a pretty good position. It wasn't hidden by a seam or half my name was cut off or anything, so I love that. My hate, I'm going to say the SANFL Reserves issue once again. It's just gone on far too long now, and it's just getting a bit ridiculous. I just want the SANFL to come up with a solution as quick as possible now so we can all move on.
Yeah, and hopefully a fair solution that actually is somewhat reasonable for the Port Adelaide Football Club would be nice, I guess, wouldn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah, certainly.
All right, so Ford, let's have your love and hate for the week, mate.
I think my love of the week is, I'm just going to say, the Port Adelaide Football Club in general. I think anyone who's old enough, and I think that's why I'm on the podcast today, but if you think back about the end of Ghostbusters with Bill Murray just going, I love this city, well, I love this football team, and I think this football club, and I think where they've come from last year, I would say on a similar trajectory to Melbourne at some stage, and some really brutal comments written about the club and its relevance and what it stood for. And I think with the arrival of Keith Thomas, David Koch, the recruitment of Ken Hinkley, of Alan Richardson, of Darren Burgess, they've just turned this club around in such a short space of time. And while there are certainly comments about our draw and how we've gotten into the finals, I think you've got to look at it in the context of just how much we were struggling in the past couple of years to where we've come to now to actually make the finals is just an extraordinary achievement. And I know I've read some comments on the board about, and with people saying, well, I don't know, we really want to be there, we're going to get hammered because of the Fremantle result, and I'm thinking, guys, it's a journey. You don't wake up one morning and you're a triple premiership winner. Those days are over. We've had to restart, rebuild. You look at Geelong over the past 10 years, and probably from 2002 to 2007 they sort of flitted in and out of the 8. They had one good finish in 2004. They dropped out of the 8 a couple of years later, and I think even in 2006 they may have finished 9th, and was certainly no sign of what was to come. So I think, as I said, it's a journey, and we're on that journey. I think we're heading in the right direction. I think it's just great.
And so what was your hate, Ford?
I think probably the lack of recognition for what we've achieved this year. I think the Fremantle results seem to be just another excuse for the media to put their well-practiced slippers into Port Adelaide and not really acknowledge what we've achieved. It's almost as if, well, you're in the finals, but you're just going to get smashed, so there's really no point you being there. And I find that pretty offensive, really. I think certainly there are results. The Fremantle result was awful, and there are results sometimes. Cornsey likes to say you just dismiss and you write off, and I think that was one of those games, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But I think just to acknowledge the achievement, I think in one comment I remember reading from our friend Jesper was, Port Adelaide made the finals because Essendon beat Carlton. No, Port Adelaide made the finals because they've won at least 12 games and have won 2 more games than the next team behind them. So I can't see how we've fluked our way in or we've had a lucky result. We've worked hard, and as Kenny says, you get what you deserve, and we deserve to be in the finals.
Yeah, we've won the games that we've needed to win, and we've beaten some bloody good teams this year, so we absolutely deserve to be there. Well, no questions asked. Absolutely,
and I think everyone talks about North Melbourne, and if they were in the finals, they'd be a real threat. And I think it was Schulzenfest pointed out, well, they've lost to Gold Coast, they've lost to GWS, their supporters all pointed at us and laughed, you're only in the finals because you beat those teams. Well, guys, you're not in them because you didn't.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my love for the week was actually the lesson we got from the Freo team on the weekend. I thought, the lesson they gave us in terms of the defensive side of the game, and how to transition that defence into offence, because they did kick a pretty reasonable score against us on the weekend. Obviously won by a pretty big margin, which was 74 points. And, really at the end of the day, that is the Port Adelaide football we've been talking about. Those Port teams that we might talk about later when we talk about our best memories of the Port Footy Club at Amy's Stadium. Those Port teams, the way they played was all based around defence, and they defended well first, but then they were able to turn that defence into a really attacking game plan as well, and turn that defence into attack and score well and heavily against other teams too. And so I thought that was actually good for our team on the weekend to come up against a team like that, to see, just what it takes and where we can be if we keep working, and that they may not be this year, they may be in future years, but I think it was a good lesson for us heading into finals to say, hey, sure, you've made the finals, but let's not get ahead of yourselves. There's a lot of work still to be done if you want to achieve anything, and if you want to, have an impact on the finals this year, then there's a whole other level you guys need to step up to in the next couple of weeks. So I actually thought that was a really good thing for our group to get that lesson at this stage of the season, but also at this stage of their development as well, and perhaps even heading into next year, they'll remember that and think, hey, that's the level we need to get ourselves to. My hate for this week was was the advertiser once again. Just, trying to divide the Port fans, basically. It just annoys me the way they get in there and try and pit the Maggies fans against the Power fans. And really, at the end of the day, we are one club. Most of us want to be doing what is best for the club as a whole, whatever that may be. And we may have slightly different opinions on that. But, the paper love to grab the fringe few and the vocal few who are antagonising against the opposite team within our one club, and try and highlight those when in reality the majority are actually supportive of both teams. The majority are actually supportive of the one club concept. The majority are supportive of us being the absolute best Port Adelaide Football Club we can be in both the AFL and the SANFL, however that looks. And so I think just that divisiveness of the media I find frustrating. I also guess that it comes back to the Ken Hinckley line again of you get what you deserve, and I think you get what you deserve in terms of the media as well. We all like to whinge and complain about the media that we get in this state, particularly in relation to the Port Footy Club, but at the end of the day, when people buy tabloid trash that's not, proper journalism, they like to sensationalise things. They like to pit people against each other. And, when that's what people buy, then that's what the media deliver. And unfortunately, that's what's happened in our state and to many degrees in our country is we've accepted some pretty ordinary media and decided that that's what we want to watch and listen to and read about. And so that's what we're getting. And I find it pretty frustrating, particularly as it relates to the Port Adelaide Football Club in this state, at least anyway. So that's my little rant for my hate for the week. So I've had a nice little rant there, but we will move on to Macca's game review because it's probably more relevant to what we're talking about this week. And obviously Port played Fremantle on Saturday at Patterson Stadium and did lose by 74 points. So Macca, let's get in and review the game, mate.
We got the power to win, power to roll. Come on, Port Adelaide aggression. We are the power from Port.
Yeah, it wasn't a great one, that's for sure. We ended up losing 9-8 to 21-6, so I was actually thinking of replacing the Port theme jingle with the Meddy Hill music to start this week, just because it was really pretty much that bad. Thankfully, it didn't really cost us due to Essendon winning. But it doesn't really excuse how we played. I think Freo, and good on Freo, I mean, they're not Failmantle anymore, they're not Rufflemantle or Freelol or any of them. They've really come of age under Ross Lyon, and I think they're pretty well headed for success in the next couple of years. And they really opened up some deficiencies in how we like to play the game. Was really our inability to turn clearances and inside 50s into genuine sort of forward attempts, really. It was a real lack of sort of ball skill going forward. I mean, we turned the ball over quite a lot. The one thing that I really noticed was we just didn't really have any forward targets inside the forward 50 to kick to. No. Especially with the long kicks, I mean, you could see us sort of thinking what we were going to do, and then we booted in long, and then it just always seemed to be to outnumbered contests. We seemed to lack 1, 2 or 3 more targets than Freo had. And then going back the other way, I'm not sure where our loose men were in defence, but they certainly weren't defending, that's for sure. Our structures, I think, structurally, that's probably the worst game we've played this year. I mean, Freo were a lot more efficient, and they really sort of took us to task and made the most of their forward entries. And if you look at some stats, they only had 3 more inside 50s, and they lost the clearances quite heavily. But I mean, they had about 16 or 17 more scoring shots, and they won by such a long margin in the end. You really wonder where it broke down for us, really.
Yeah, I think Freo. Sorry,
you go, mate.
Okay, I think Freo and ET, you alluded to this earlier, were just fantastic. I was really impressed by them. I know that they're a bit like Sydney, and they seem to get a lot of bad press for the style of football they play, but it really was tough, aggressive footy and real hunt-in packs kind of footy that we couldn't, in the first half especially, we just couldn't do anything without being under pressure. And I mean, there were times we would run the ball up to half forward and then we just stop. And I think that was symptomatic that we probably needed another big target up forward. It would be really great if Johnny Butcher was fit or if Jared Redden was playing, that we could have that one more target. Because I thought in the second half we ran and we just kept going. And I don't know what the discussion with Hinckley and Richardson was at quarter time. It looked a bit animated, and that Kenny maybe wasn't happy with what was going on, and they may well have thrown the playbook out of the window at half time. That you just can't afford against a side like Freo. And similarly, I've seen us play like this against Sydney, to run a ball up to the 50-metre arc and then start chipping it around looking for an easy spot up, because they just don't give it to you, because it's just at you and at you and at you. And they were really, really efficient at that in the whole first half. They've got quite a bit of pace in that side. They're a very big, strong-bodied side. I think I posted on the boards last week that Ross Lyon probably has only a plan A, but it's a bloody good plan A, and it's very hard to get over the top of them. I don't know how they do applying that sort of pressure for 4 quarters. It's quite interesting to think about. They're up against another top 4 side like a Geelong or Hawthorn, and they're in touch at half time and they've thrown everything at them, whether they can keep doing it for the whole 4 quarters. Against us, we just yet again crumbled against them in a half of football, or against a Ross Lyon coach team. And I think every year for the last 4 or 5 years we've had a game where we've had between 1 and 3 goals at half time against Freo. But I think in the second half, maybe they probably did relax a bit, but I think we just played, as Ken likes to say, brave for football. We really brought the ball through and just kept going. We stopped holding the play up 80 metres out from goal and just put them under some pressure. And I think as you mentioned, Macca, they evened up quite a bit on the inside 50s, and I think that was because we just kept pumping it in there. And as Dwayne Russell likes to call it, at least create the chaos ball and put them under some pressure. And had we done that in the first half, maybe we would have been closer at half-time. I don't know. It may just be that the pressure would still have got to us.
Yeah, I think maybe I went in with different expectations. I was really thinking it was going to end up being a bit of a underground bare-knuckle fist fight, sort of 6-5 or something like that, but it was miles off from that.
Yeah, I think what it takes to beat a side with that so-called Ross Lyon game plan is really firstly confidence. Like, you've got to take the game on and you've got to be brave. You can't just sit back and chip it round and hope to sort of it's going to open up and work. It's what you work your way through, because it just doesn't happen. And then obviously the skill to execute under that pressure, because the pressure they brought was immense. They really had us under the pump. And obviously on the day we just weren't able to exhibit the confidence, but probably more so show the skill to be able to work our way through it. And I think because our skills were so poor early on, then we also did lose the confidence for a large part of the game to take the game on. And I think that's why the better teams do better against that sort of game plan, where they do have that confidence, they do have that skill to get over the back. And so they're able to get through that defence, move it quickly. And so I still think perhaps that Freo don't have the complete game plan, but it takes a very, very good team to get around it and to get past it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes you've got to play finals type football in the minor round, and I think the finals type football is you just go at it, you take it on, and you just try and create things. I think playing fancy possession football, trying to play low-risk football just doesn't work in finals, and sometimes it doesn't work against a side like Freo that plays finals-type football in the minor round. So I think it's a good learning experience, as I'm sure Craigie would say. But I think ET, you did make the point before that if we learn something from this, it's a really great game for us. And I think Ken certainly in the press conference I saw said that he put it to the players, look, this is what we want to be, this is how good we want to be, this is what we want to bring every week for our supporters from this club, is that sort of intensity and that type of football. And I think if they can learn from that and do that, then that is a great experience for us. In the end, as you said, Macca, it didn't really hurt us because Essendon beat Carlton. And in terms of where we're at, I think we all acknowledge that Fremantle are a top 4 side and we're borderline top 8 side. I think we've certainly come a long way. I think there's probably a group of teams between 6 and 12 that have probably got some pretty equal claims, but we can certainly pick up from that. And if we can keep going on the trajectory we're going, do some good recruiting, some trading and drafting, there's no doubt we can really start to knock on the door.
Yep. And so moving on from there, Ford, who do you have as your best players, mate?
That's a A tough call.
Do you want to just leave yours blank for this week,
I might. I can't think of anyone that really had a four-quarter impact. Funnily enough, I thought, Chad Wingard did a bit for the time he was on. I thought, Ollie Wines was pretty brave. Certainly, in terms of stats, no one really racked him up. I mean, Kane was thereabouts again. Robbie Gray was very good for the time he was able to get into the contests. Other than that, I probably wouldn't be handing out too many bouquets this week.
All right, we might move on to you, Macca. Who do you have in the best players? And actually, your best young player as well while we're at it, Macca.
Sure. Robbie Gray, I thought, was probably our best player. I thought he played quite well, did quite a lot of good work in the middle, also kicked a goal. Matty Lobe just continues to impress. I mean, 43 hitouts is massive, and 15 tackles is ridiculous for a ruckman. I mean, I think that's only about 3 or 4 off the AFL all-time high. So he's getting right up there. And it's not the first time he's had a big game in terms of tackles as well. Yeah, outside of that, he's sort of struggling a bit. Wingard did well when he was on the ground. I thought Andrew Moore played quite well. I mean, Boakey was down, Broadbent was down, Ebert was down. Best young player, probably Aaron Young or Sam Colquhoun. I'm going to go with Colquhoun just because I think that in another pressure game, he really stood up and didn't really waste the ball too much. I think there was one error, but apart from that, he shows quite a good, cool head and uses the ball quite well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to jump in for a moment, I just thought, Aaron Young, I did quite like his game. That coming on as a sub, he picked up, I think, 10 touches, was it? And just showed a real ability to stand up in tackles, to get his arms free and dish the ball off against probably one of the best tackling teams in the competition. And as you mentioned, of course, Lobe, he did slip my mind, although 1 mark for a 200-centimetre big man isn't enough. But, everything else he did was terrific.
Yeah, and I thought the same. I thought Gray and Lobby were probably our 2 best. I thought, it was one of those days where you could probably just about put the flag up and go, well, all played poorly, because, when you go down by 74 points, I don't necessarily think anyone in the team deserves a whole lot of kudos, but if you pick the best, you'd say Gray and Lobby were probably the 2 best there, and if you're looking at the young guys, I think definitely Colquhoun, just really continues to impress me for such a young guy, for such a slight guy. The composure he's shown, the skill he's shown, the ability to get his hands on the ball he's shown, I think it's just been exceptional. He's going to be a really exciting talent for the future if he keeps up that trajectory. And good to see Youngie back. It's been a while, and to be honest, I'd sort of lost a bit of confidence in him. I'd looked at some of the games he'd played and thought, well, he's not doing much in the SANFL. He just just didn't seem to be going anywhere, to be honest. But he seems to have come back into the AFL team, as sometimes happens with these players, and be playing better almost in the AFL than he was in the SANFL. And so it's good to see, and he's looking like he belongs again at the moment. So I thought those 2 were probably the 2 best out of the young guys. Macca, we might move on and have a quick review of Port going down to Sturt at Alberton. I'm sure there's not too much that needs to be said about that, but why don't you give us a bit of a rundown, mate?
Cheer, cheer the black and the white, honour the Magpies day and by night, live that loyal...
They lost 11 goals 13 to 12 goals 14, so they lost by 7 points. The problem with the Magpies over the last 7 or 8 weeks is just slow starts. I mean, we just seem to be behind the 8 ball from the beginning every single week, and you just can't afford to do that every single week. We were 4 goals down again at quarter time. We did well to catch up, but against the Sturt side, which hasn't won a lot of games in the last couple of years, I really did expect more. And we ended up going down by 7 points. We really should have come home a little bit stronger in the last quarter, but we didn't. In terms of best players, you're looking at Sam Gray again. He's probably a bit of a smoky for the Magarey. He had 29 touches and 11 marks and a goal. Corey Beard played at centre half forward. He had 24 touches and 10 marks. And then you're looking at probably Ben Newton, who had another very, very strong game with 2 goals, 21 touches and 8 marks. And I think the highest inside 50s on the ground with 7.
Yep, he was very good going by the stats, and he must be really knocking on the door. I guess in terms of the Magpies, you'd ask the question of all of this talk about the reserves team, whether it's starting to get to them as well. I mean, there's articles in the paper today about the team pretty much expecting to be out of existence even by next year now. And whether that's taken the wind out of their sails, there's certainly a bit of talk from Michael John that it's had an impact. And it must be pretty tough to carry. I mean, you see with the Essendon drug saga that's gone on and on, that certainly over the last month until their win against Carlton, that they just seem to be slowly deflating. I don't know if that's just because they're full of puncture holes at the moment from Stephen Dank, but Port Adelaide just seem to be going the same way. Like they, as you said, Macca, they just can't get a good start and they'll get back into a game and then they'll just drop off again. And there seems to be something just not quite right at the moment.
Yeah, I think it is just a great example of how off-field instability can lead to on-field poor performance, and we've certainly seen that with the power side over the last few years as well. And there's no doubt that it does happen, that when you haven't got the off-field stuff right, and it's not necessarily for Port, obviously, haven't got it right, but there's just a whole lot of instability going on there and a lot of uncertainty going on there, that it can really affect the on-field performance, and I think be pretty draining on-field as well.
Absolutely, and one thing I want to say is to the listeners out there is try and get to Alberton Oval this week, just because we're playing Westies, and who knows what's going to happen in the off-season. It could very well be the last game at Alberton Oval.
Could be. And I guess too, just in other SANFL news of any interest, when with Ronnie Fuller being sacked at South and talk of Andrew Collins possibly replacing him down there, I mean, there's certainly changes could be afoot at West Adelaide as well, and maybe they'll be a little bit vulnerable too, which would be good for Port.
Yeah. So, did you guys have a chance to have a look at some of the SANFL the power plays in the SANFL?
Yeah, I certainly did. Louis Stevenson, he's bit of a forgotten man ever since he got dropped earlier in the year. So you sort of forget that he's on the list. But he's had a really good last month or 6 weeks at SANFL level, and he was best on ground for Norwood on the weekend. I've already mentioned Benny Newton. He had 21 touches and was second best for Port Adelaide. Good to see Tommy Cleary getting in the best players as well for Glenelg.
Yep. I was a bit disappointed in Daniel Stewart's game. I was really hoping he'd have a big one, because I think in that Freo game, one of the things that showed up was we really needed another tall marking target. And if Butch isn't fit, I know most of our board posters have probably written Daniel Stewart off, but I think just in terms of a target, just tell him to get up there, and he's really athletic and he can run and he's got a decent engine, and just tell him to get to contests and cause spillages and let the crummers, let the guys like Monfries and Jakey Need get onto a spillage at the foot of the pack. And unfortunately he had a pretty quiet game again and really didn't push his chances for selection all that well. I don't know how Butch is going. I've been kind of keen on the idea of Cleary getting a run in the forward line for a while now. I think as a junior he played forward and back. And while it sounds like, and I'm only going on the report on the Port website, that his stats probably got padded a bit by some keeping off football late in the game by Glenelg, I think he's a big, strong kid, really good motor, really can get to a contest, and maybe it's worth throwing him up forward. I think for this week's game against Carlton, it probably wouldn't hurt to rest a few players and get a few experienced bodies in there, like Cassisi if he's fit, and even Tommy Logan, and maybe a couple of young guys that would be just champing at the bit to have a crack at it, like a Cleary and a Newton.
Yeah, well, I thought it was just great to see Stevenson playing well. I mean, you sort of keep saying this each week. There seems to be a different name popping up each week in the best players. And in other years, it's almost seemed like that's happened because they've just been sort of pulling them out of the raffle and having to pick someone. But this year, it seems like there's genuinely players in the SANFL putting in good performances and a broad depth of different players putting in good performances, which is just creating that pressure for selection that I think we haven't had for a number of years. So it's really good to see these players who are on the fringe stepping up, realising that it's their job to actually keep playing good footy, to keep the pressure on the team, to keep the depth there, and that they need to keep doing that so that when the chance is there, that they can jump in. And it's really good to see that depth that's developing at our club, and I think it's going to stand us in really good stead over the coming years, where we're really able to clean out some of the lower end of the list without having to hang on to a whole bunch of players who haven't perhaps been showing that they can perform at SANFL and even at AFL level as well. So it's really good to see that depth of talent going right through our list, I reckon.
I think that's right, and I think in the last couple of years we've probably been excited if guys got 15 touches in a SANFL game and scraped in a seventh best, and now we're actually seeing guys getting best on and getting between 25 and 30 touches and just really almost influencing games and certainly being a presence in games, and I think a lot of that's to do with Burgess and getting them up to an AFL standard of fitness, and probably to Kenny and Alan's coaching and the assistant coaches out there as well, and the development coaches telling them what they need to do to be good AFL footballers, and they're just going out there and going through the process, if you like, and doing what they need to do to be a good footballer rather than whatever it was they were doing before.
All right, so guys, let's move on and start our little chat about Footy Park now. I know we were, in many ways, I think some of us might not be as sad as others to see the end of Footy Park and to move back into Adelaide Oval. But we have had some pretty darn good memories there as the Port Adelaide Football Club. So perhaps, Macca, you'd like to go first as we talk about our top 5 memories of Footy Park.
No worries. I'll start with the 5th. I came up with a short list of about 18 different memories. Had a lot of trouble whittling it down to 5, but this is my number 5, which is Russell Johnston's hit on Carl Delena in 1988. It was, in my opinion, one of the very best SANFL games of all time, Port versus Sturt. It was the first leg of a double header that day. I think there was over 30,000 people there. The bump happened right in front of me, to quote a very famous Crow supporter. And yeah, it was just an absolute ripper of a bump. And Johnston wasn't even reported on the day. It actually came down to Lee Wicker, had him go up for trial by video during the week, and suspended him for 5 games. And of course that meant that he, unless we lost the first final, he was not going to play again that year, and he did end up missing the grand final and the premiership. So you can thank Lee Wicker for that. He's a bit like an STD. He's just the gift that keeps on giving, just not a really good gift. That's all.
An Eddie Murphy line about he's like luggage. You just can't get rid of that shit.
Yeah.
So what was number 2, Macca? Let's keep going through.
All right, number 4 was round 22, 2002 versus Brisbane. Whoever won the minor premiership, and of course that meant also winning the double home final chance as well due to the MCG rule. In my opinion, that's probably the best game of AFL football played at Football Park. Port kicked away with a 10-minute brilliant football in the third quarter. And I think we kicked about 4 or 5 goals in about 6 or 7 minutes and really put it to Brisbane. Brisbane came back hard. They hit the front with about 3 minutes left. There was a couple of heroes in the last 2 minutes. Obviously, Roger James and his magical rove and snap with about 90 seconds left to put us back in front. And Brent Guerra's massive tackle with around about 25 seconds left as Brisbane were streaming forward. And of course, the siren went with the ball being driven deep into the Brisbane forward line, and Hardwick somehow got a spoil in for a mark on Lepic, and the siren went, and everyone went absolutely nuts. It was great.
Yeah, great game. Great game. Good memories.
Number 3, I'm going to go with the 1994 SANFL Grand Final, but in particular Scotty Hodges' last quarter. You can't really beat that. I mean, such drama throughout that year. Woodville West Torrens had beaten us 3 times that year by, I think, an average of about 70 points. We beat them in the last round of the SANFL by 80 points at Alberton Oval. I think the Eagles were the shortest price favourites in SANFL Grand Final history. We were down by 6 goals at quarter time. Hodges had 4 kicks and 1 goal to 3/4 time, and then he went absolutely bananas in the last quarter, kicked 5 goals out of 9. I think Port kicked about 8 goals in 13 minutes to start the last quarter. We took everyone by surprise, and it was all down to that man, Scotty Hodges.
That was just an amazing game and an amazing quarter of football. And I remember there was a story going around after that Jason Spear was going to be drafted by an AFL club, and come the draft, his name never got called out, and he called up one of the clubs and said, what happened to me being drafted? And the response was, well, what happened to you in the last quarter of the grand final?
Well, it is interesting that because, yeah, I mean, he had a really good couple of years for the Eagles and was probably the second best fullback in the state behind Roger Delaney. And he was young enough to be drafted. I did hear that the Crows were into him, but yeah, it just didn't happen to him. He was never the same after that. I think he pretty much retired a couple of years after.
Yeah, he was, I think, a policeman, as I recall, and I think maybe the work as well sort of ate into his time, but I don't think he ever recovered psychologically from what happened in that quarter of football. And I still remember that time when Scotty ran him down from behind. He was bounding out of defence, having a bounce, and bang, and suddenly he's got him, this vice-like grip's got the Guernsey, and he's dragged him down and converted the shot, and it was just amazing. And even David McKay, who was a staunch West Torrens supporter and obviously one of their former players, he was getting excited by Port's comeback. And I remember it just being in the crowd and the hairs standing up on the back of your neck. I watch that game now and you listen to the roar of the crowd now and you still, it gives you goosebumps.
Yeah, and that one was definitely in my top 5 as well. It was just such a magnificent game and made all the better for me by the fact that I had an Eagles supporting mate at the game who was just hanging shit on me for the entire first 3 quarters, telling me how hopeless we were and how they were killing us and just absolutely getting into me. So I found that last quarter particularly enjoyable. But, wasn't that one of the beautiful things about Scott Hodges was just, everyone remembers him for, I guess, his marking, his leading, his beautiful goal kicking. But, he was lethal as well. If you got in his way when he was on the lead, he wasn't afraid to let you know that wasn't the place to be. And if he had a chance to catch you defensively and pile drive you into the ground, he absolutely wouldn't hesitate. and so that's just one of the great things about Scotty is not only was he the sort of glamour full forward, for want of a better word, although he never sort of came across as the glamour full forward, but he was prepared to do the hard work as well, and that was just one of the things that made Scotty so great.
I will mention though, E.T., that in 1990 he did win the footy budget Mr. Footy Spunk competition. I think it was the mullet.
Well, mullets were big.
That mullet was fantastic. I tried to grow a mullet like that, but my head just wouldn't curl at the end like his did. Very, very disappointing.
So what was your next one, Macca?
Memory number 2, can't go past the 2004 prelim. It was the most brilliant final played at the ground, in my opinion. Just such an intense week. That's, I think, a couple of memories. I think I actually vomited before we left the ground, or left to go to the ground, just because I was that nervous. I just could not handle the pressure, and I wasn't even bloody playing. So that's how much it affected me in the stands. The noise, as the players, they showed a shot as St Kilda ran out onto the ground, and Port were lining up in the rooms, and Choco's there clapping him on and revving him up, and they went down the tunnel, and the noise they weren't even on the ground yet. That's the loudest noise I've ever heard at a football game, MCG included. And just, of course, Gav's goal and Wilbur's courageous marks, and especially in hindsight, knowing that he had 2 dislocated shoulders to take those 2 brilliant marks in the last quarter, you'll never forget that. And obviously Burgoyne's spoil as well, and just the raw emotion in the stands when the siren went. I mean, everyone was in tears. Everyone I looked at was bowling their eyes out. We finally made it. This was the big hurdle, and we did it. That was what makes it so memorable for me.
Yeah, that was definitely high up on my list as well. And the irony of that game, you were talking about our memories of Footy Park, is I was actually living in Sydney at the time. I was a student. I think we'd just finished our exams. I'd actually left my exam celebrations to go sit in a pub by myself and watch that game. And so I literally sat in the Epping Hotel in Sydney in front of this massive flat screen TV completely by myself with no one else even interested in watching the game, and screamed my head off at the TV. But it was just one of the best games I've ever seen. It was just, I didn't even need anyone else there to enjoy that one. It was an incredible game of football that just had absolutely everything, including, of course, the good guys winning at the end of the day. And that's one of my all-time favourite games, that one.
Yep. And my number 1, I think we all know what's coming. You can't overlook Scotty Hodges' goal in that prelim in 1996. Just for those that weren't there or were too young to remember or didn't have a chance of going, the breeze, it wasn't even a breeze. It was a gale force wind going directly across the goal where he was kicking from. He must have had a margin of error of about 15 centimetres to hit that goal, and he hit it absolutely perfectly with 10 seconds left. And the thing we forget is that he had 3 shots on goal that quarter and missed them all. And he had one kicking directly into the breeze from about 25 metres out and didn't even make the distance. So that's how strong that wind was. And he just hit it perfectly, and you just knew it was going through as soon as he kicked it. And I mean, just to break Norwood's hearts like that, I mean, it was great.
And Macca, you'd probably remember this. A couple of games might have blended together for me, but was that the game where he broke Anthony Harvey's collarbone?
Yeah, absolutely. That was probably the turning point in the game. I mean, Norwood dominated the first probably 10 or 11 minutes of the last quarter, and Harvey was a real big player in that.
Yeah, he was dropping into the space in front of Scotty all the time, and I think rumour had it that Scotty said at one point, "You do it again, and I'm going to clean you up." Well,
as ET just said, if you drop in front of Scotty, he's going to hit you. And
he's going to crunch you.
He hit Harvey very hard and did his shoulder. We didn't see him again, and Norwood went the same after that. I mean, they shut up shop really early in that game. I don't think they had an inside 50 in the last 12 or 13 minutes of the game, so they really went defensive, and it really cost them the match in the end.
And there was that memory I always have of that goal was the Norwood guys jumping off the bench when the free kick was given, and like they knew what was going to happen. They knew that the horror was unravelling before them.
Yeah,
and he was going to kick this goal.
And that's my number one Port moment. I'll never forget that. I dream of that every night, just about. I mean, I'll never ever forget that moment.
And you've only got one kid.
Exactly.
And that was one of my all-time favourites as well. Like, I probably only sat in the members at Amy a handful of times, and for some reason that was the one day that I was sitting on the front row of the top tier in the members stand at Amy Stadium, directly behind Scotty's kick. And as you said, Macca, I think looking at the replays of the kick doesn't do it justice, because you don't realise just how much everyone had struggled to kick goals that day and how much the wind had been affecting everyone's kicks. And really it was, in the context of the day, it was just about an impossible kick. And so, but you still, as I stood there behind it, I still remember thinking to myself, Scotty will kick this. Because he was just that kind of guy. Like, he was just the kind of guy who, when it had to be done, when it had to be won, you just thought, yeah, Scotty will do this. And the feeling when it went through was just unbelievable. Everyone just went bananas. And it was just a great game. I loved that. That moment really summed up a lot about the Port Adelaide Football Club in that era, and in all eras, really.
Well, there was a bit of a premonition from David Mackay on the TV commentary when Scotty missed the first goal. He missed it from the same angle, but only about 10 metres out. And he said, "You don't have to worry about Scotty Hodges. He always kicks the important goal." And come the end of the match, he did just that.
Yeah, didn't he? All right, so Ford, we're going to move across to you for your top memories of Footy Park. Perhaps if you can just, touch on, without having to go into the ones of that Macca's mentioned that you had on your list too, and then share with us any extras that you had on top of those as well.
Well, I've picked some older games. I think that's why you dragged me out of the nursing home. So I've delved back. First of all, this is one for the listeners, is a question of what was Port Adelaide's first win at Football Park? Because interestingly enough, the Port website gives a game against South Adelaide on June 8, 1974. The Port won 2016 to 16-13. Now, according to some old footy budgets I have, my partner actually has. She has quite an impressive collection of old footy budgets. Norwood and Sturt were scheduled to play at Footy Park that day, and Port and South were supposed to play at Adelaide Oval. And Port Adelaide's first scheduled game at Football Park was on June 22, 1974 against Glenelg, which Port also won 1921 to 16-18. So I'm not actually sure which is Port's first win at Football Park, whether the Port South game the scheduling was swapped around, or whether the Port website's got that wrong and it's the Port Glenelg game, or in fact there was what they used to call, they had Football Park invitation games during the year where they took a game that was scheduled for one of the other ovals and put it there, and there was Port played Norwood one weekend of one of these invitation games, and I'm not sure whether the Port Norwood game got shifted, but Port also won that game. So at least one thing we're sure of, that the first game Port Adelaide played at Football Park was a win.
Of course.
But anyway, so that's one for our listeners to have a look into and maybe get back to us and let us know which is the right answer. probably the games, I'm not going to do them in any particular order. I think for me, the 1977 grand final was just amazing. And I think when you talk about the 1977 grand final, you have to talk about it in context of the 1976 grand final. As horrible as it was, it probably lit the fuse on John Cale's coaching career. I think it made him a better coach. He made tougher decisions, and you could see throughout John Cale's career that what players did in minor round determined whether they would play in finals. I think a few guys let him down in that 1976 grand final. We lost it by over 40 points, so clearly they did. Sturt were an interesting team in that context, in that everything they said about Sturt then, too old, too slow, too many premierships, was what they were saying about Port through the 90s, certainly the mid-90s, when we just kept winning. I was at both grand finals, 76 and 77. 76 was my first one, so it's certainly a memorable moment for me, because there was, the official crowd figure was somewhere around 67,000. I know Michelangelo Rucci has written since then that there was more like 80,000. They just stopped counting for health and safety reasons. And back then, you didn't have covered concourses, so people were just basically hanging off this uncovered area at the top of the ground. You're sort of looking up there thinking, what happens if they fall? I guess they go splat. And there's 3,000 to 5,000 people on the oval in a grand final. Right up to the boundary line, sitting on the grass. They jammed so many people, and that's the sort of crowd a Port Sturt game drew. And certainly I remember from that game, Port kicking the first couple of goals, and it just all went pear-shaped from there. And I think we all know, the Rick Davies story of that game, and Chrissy Nat, who just basically froze up in the rooms before the game, and guys like Bagshaw and Klomp and Bergen and Miles, these, I hate to say it, great Sturt names, they all just turned it on that day. But I think Port learned some important lessons. We'd finished top that year by 5 points in percentage. Sturt had lost, I think, the qualifying final and had to win through the first semi-final and the preliminary final to get to the grand final. I think everyone thought Port were just a shoe-in, and we learned an important lesson. And we came back in 1977. We finished top by even more. We finished top by 7 points by percentage. Sturt, I think, finished ninth that year, had an ordinary run with injury and never got going. We played Glenelg in a grand final. And I remember before the game that in the footy budget, we weren't even favoured among the inverted commas, air quotation marks, experts to win the game. I think everyone was sort of thinking, well, there's a monkey on Port's back. We'd lost the 71 and 72 grand finals to North. We'd lost, I think, 3 grand finals to Sturt back in the 60s. And it had been the drought, as we call it, a 12-year drought. It was like unheard of for Port supporters. Since Foss Williams arrived in 1950, it was just a cavalcade of premierships. You kick a rock over at Alberton and out would pop a TSL trophy. And so the 77 grand final, it was just an extraordinary game because Glenelg jumped us early. We'd beaten them in the semi-final. They kicked 5 goals to 2. We kicked 2 late goals in the quarter, and I think everyone's hearts stopped fluttering. But there was barely anything in it all day. Port lost. I think Ivan Ekman got a massive corky, and Kimmy Kinnear copped a knee in the head and got knocked out, and Darryl Cale, I think, tore a hamstring and couldn't come back on. And in the end, Cale strapped up Ekman and shoved him in a forward pocket, and he was a back pocket back then. He kicked 3 goals too, sitting as basically an immobile forward pocket. And I still remember the story where he missed a set shot for goal in the third quarter, and Cale ran a message out, and they asked him on the footy show after, Jack, what message did you run out to Ivan? He said, I told him that if I had anyone fit left on the bench, I'd have dragged him for missing that shot. But the guy could barely walk, and it was like Tim Evans had 6 goals to half-time and then got king hit and had concussion, played the second half out, and it was just an extraordinary game. Russell Ebert had a reputation that he didn't perform in finals, and he was probably second best player, and I think Bucky was best on ground. And there was just that point in the last quarter where we got about 26 points up, and we were heading into time, just hitting time on. He thought, we've got it. We've got it, And then the Bays kicked, I think, 3 goals in the last few minutes, and so you had your heart in your mouth, and they were really running hard at us, and the siren went, and we won, and it was just incredible. People poured onto the oval, and I think on the Port website, though, you can see the pictures of just everyone on the oval and Russell holding the trophy up. And extraordinary game. 1982 preliminary final. I've written about it on the board and Memories of Football Park, and I just have to say again that everything you've heard about that game, believe it. I was at that game. We were playing Glenelg. We were getting hammered. We were probably about 6 goals down late in the second quarter. Dave Granger was on the bench. He was brought on, thrown into the game, and just chaos ensued. Everyone's seen the footage of him running on. Cornsey sort of whacked the arm up and caught him high, and then Dave's just gone bang, and Cornsey's gone down, and the game, it was almost gothic in its presentation. It was at the dark and stormy skies, and everyone that was there will say that as Dave was running along the boundary line warming up, there was just this sense of foreboding. It was like a Stephen King novel that something was going to happen, and what happened was just amazing. And we lost the game in the end by a point. And it was an extraordinary experience of a football match. You hated losing. I think Nord went on and won the flag. Rumour had it as well that they toasted Dave at their premiership celebrations, because Glenelg went into that grand final a shell of a team. They'd had guys hit, knocked out. Steve Barrett had unfortunately broken his leg. It was just amazing. An amazing game. I mean, we lost it, but you went away from it thinking, what the hell went on there? That was just, it's like being at a movie, like with a Stanley Kubrick directed movie, or Wes Craven or someone like that.
It was a different game back then, wasn't it?
It was. I think Dave copped a massive suspension from it, but he was only reported once in the whole game, which I think, if you watch it, was pretty amazing. A few blokes fell into his fists and forearms that day, and it really was a memorable game, and not, it was for that, and just then the outrage in the papers, for a week after, photos and stories, and it was front and back page, and it was just astonishing. The 1990 grand final, just because of the whole context of that season, obviously it was the Port Adelaide AFL bid. I've written about it on the boards, and so I won't go into great detail. You can certainly read all of the context there, but it really was an us against the world mentality. It was, I think, what Port Adelaide's AFL bid had certainly galvanised the rest of the football community against us. They certainly would have liked to have seen us go home from that grand final with our tail between our legs. We lost the qualifying final to Glenelg, who basically were our arch enemy right from the 70s right through to the 90s. They spearheaded the legal action against us in that year. So it was a real battle of the forces of lightness and dark, and who was light and who was dark depended who you barracked for. And just an amazing game. Scotty Hodges broke the goal kicking record in that game. He hurt his knee just before half time. We all thought, oh no, it's, we've lost him and he's not going to break the record, and what's this going to do? And he was almost set to turn it up, and then he just said, I think at half time, he just flexed the knee a bit. Did, oh no, it's not that bad. I'm going to strap it up. I'll go out there. And he came out and he kicked 3 or 4 goals in the second half, and it was just amazing. Just an extraordinary game, an extraordinary experience. It's all of the emotion, and in that last quarter again we kicked away. And I'll do one more. And this was inspired by Black 18 posting this in that very same thread. The 1979 first semi-final and the Tony Giles tackle on John Duckworth. I mean, as the Scotty Hodges kick for goal sits in your mind forever. I think the Giles tackle on Duckworth will always sit in my mind. That 1979 season, I think Central's finished minor premiers. They had a really good side. Duckworth won the Magarey medal. He was a big man. He was, in the old language, 6'4", 15 stone, and he ran like the wind. He was really quick. And quite a number of times during that year, he would set Centrals off where he would just go for these pulverising runs down through, half forward, brush aside any tackler and kick a goal. And I think he'd done it to Port in a game at Elizabeth a few weeks earlier where they'd beaten us. And we were on top in that semi-final. It was, I think everyone was a bit surprised that we took it up to them and we were right on top of them. And he went on one of those runs. He was bounding down through half forward, and Giles just looked him square in the eye and said, "Nah, you're not getting past me, pal." And he's just met him head to head, and he's probably took him high, maybe looking back. It was a long time ago now, but the umpies, I figured Duckworth was big enough and ugly enough to look after himself. He was probably 5 or 6 inches taller than Gilesy and weighed about 3 stone more. And Gilesy's just slammed into him, and he's brought him down, and I reckon he snuck a couple of sneaky ones in there. And Duckworth come up swinging. He's been done for the umpies holding the ball, Johnny, and the Port crowd just started booing. They booed him because he threw those punches. They booed him for the rest of the game, and the next week Central's played South, and the South supporters, all 12 of them, they booed him too. And he was very unhappy. He came out in the paper and said, "Is this the way you treat your Magarey medalists?" And Centrals were seen off. South made the grand final. Port smashed them and started a run of 3 in a row. Beautiful stuff.
Beautiful stuff. Well, guys, I've got a couple here that actually haven't been mentioned. I can't believe the first one of these hasn't been mentioned, and one of mine was definitely Showdown 1. One of my absolute favourites from Amy Stadium. You know, I was lucky enough to be at that game. For some reason, some Crows fan had given up their tickets that day, and me and a mate got to sit smack bang in the middle of the outer, and absolutely infuriated a whole host of Crows fans around us who obviously weren't used to having opposition supporters there barracking for the other team, and didn't appreciate the fact that someone might actually barrack for the other team. And so we had a great time getting, and purely just by cheering for the Port Adelaide Football Club, we never said anything towards them or to them, and that seemed to just infuriate them even more, which was particularly enjoyable. And we had streamers and flags and scarves and beanies, and we went the whole hog. And what a day it was, and what a great moment for the Port Adelaide Football Club to say, "Hey, guess what? We're here, and we are the Port Adelaide Football Club, and we're going to win." And we came out and we did it, and absolutely put them back in their place right from the start. And since that day, I don't think they've recovered in terms of showdowns. So that was one of my absolute favourites. And obviously, one of the highlights of the day was the Jamo versus Cummings stoush that happened down in the pocket there. And, just another little bit of spice to add to the developing rivalry between Port Adelaide and, the rest of the state. And so that was one of my absolute favourite games. I don't know if you guys managed.
Absolutely great.
Were you guys at the game?
Yeah, absolutely. That was number 6 on my list. I just missed out. We got shoved. Normally we sit in the members. We got shoved behind the goals exactly where Jamo and Cummings went at it. And just like the 76 grand final, I reckon there was much more than capacity at that game, because there was no seats anywhere, and standing room was 6-7 deep, like all around the ground. It was nuts. It was absolutely nuts.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they let a few get snuck in, a few friends of friends and those sort of things. But, the other thing I had here was just the trifecta of 88, 89, 90. I was 8, 9 and 10 years old at the time, so I'm kind of giving away my age there. But, as a young fella who, was passionate about Port Adelaide and what the Port Adelaide Football Club stood for, I think that was just the period that absolutely galvanised my support to just be absolutely Port Adelaide for life. Like, given everything that happened around that period, the attempted entry into the AFL, the way, the legal ramifications that happened as a result of that, the the formation of a new football club purely out of a hatred for Port Adelaide. Those things and that period, and the fact that we won those 3 flags in a row, and seeing my absolute heroes up there winning flags, singing "We Are the Champions" back at the club rooms afterwards. Just some absolutely brilliant memories for me there as a young lad. That, as I said, just absolutely galvanised my support for the Port Adelaide Football Club. So those 3 years I'll always remember as being pretty special as a young kid.
And certainly those times back at the club after a grand final were just amazing. I don't know whether in these sort of sanitised, high profile footballer days you can ever recapture that. But
I don't think some of the words that Paul Northeast yelled from the dais would be allowed nowadays.
No, I still remember him throwing his premiership medal into the crowd in 1994. He said, "You guys, there's so much talk in the media that I don't give a stuff about football. Well, this shows how serious I am." And he throws the bloody medal into the crowd.
And did he say stuff or something else?
Oh, I think he said something else. Yeah.
All right, guys, we better keep moving because we have made this a bit of a long one. So let's have a quick little look towards the Carlton game on Saturday. What are you looking forward to in the game on Saturday, Macca? Who do you think is going to win, and what do you think the margin will be?
We are the Navy Blues. We are the old dark Navy Blues.
Well, I think Carlton will probably win by about 25 points, but the main issue I've got is where does our improvement come from the last meeting against Carlton? I think we lost by about 3 or 4 goals last time. The good thing for us is they've got a lot of key players down on form from when they were flying earlier in the year against us. Murphy, Robinson, Gibbs, Betts, Scotland, they're all down on how they played against us earlier in the year. Last time they had 14 more inside 50s, 30 more contested possessions, and took 12 more marks inside 50 than we did. So that's something we've really got to keep an eye on. And I think if we can turn that around, we might win the game. But for me, I think Carlton will do enough to make the finals.
Okay, and Ford, what do you reckon, mate?
I'll go with Port Adelaide by 17 points. I think we'll have learned something from that Freo game about intensity at the man and really putting pressure on all over the ground. I think I'd like to see, as I said earlier, maybe a couple of young guys and a couple of senior bodies come in and rest. I'd be quite willing to give Wingard and Wines a week off in preparation for the first final, and I think there's players we can bring in that, while certainly not at their standard, would, in a once-off game, would certainly add to the side enough to take out the points. I'm just really looking forward to the day. Really, I think the club's put on a tremendously full program of events with, champions of the club doing a lap of the oval. So I think players representing a range of our premiership victories or all of our premiership victories at Football Park. I think there's a Legends match on, as I recall, and just a huge day, and I think it's just going to be really spectacular. And I guess our record in these huge days hasn't been too great in recent times, though, so that makes me a little nervous. I certainly remember that Richmond game a couple of years ago, but yeah, I'd like to think that with the finals coming up, and even if we give a couple of blokes a rest, that as a real team spirit, that we'll bring something to this game and really just finish off our time at Footy Park with a good win.
Yeah, I tend to think the same, actually. I think, these have been the games in previous years we haven't done well in. But I really think we've got a different team this year. We've got a different mentality around these sort of teams and these sort of games. And I think we've now got a team that really, see these important games and want to take them on head on. I think they will have learned a lot from Fremantle last week. I think we're going to see a lot more pressure applied. I think we're going to see a lot more, skill hopefully applied. But I think more than anything, our players are going to want to come out and want to really prove a point this week heading into finals that, hey, we're not just in here to make up the numbers. We're not just in here because Essendon fell over with their drug scandal. We're here to win games of football and to play finals and to successfully play finals. And I think they're going to want to be out. They're going to be really out to prove a point this week. And I think they're going to be really out to make a stand heading into finals and to have form heading into finals. So I think our boys are going to see this as a very, very important week, and I think they're going to come out and show something, and I think they're going to beat Carlton by 21 points. So those are our thoughts. Hopefully we can get the thoughts from all of the fans out there on the forums. We look forward to hearing your feedback. Hopefully this week with me back, we still get some good feedback like we did last week when I wasn't here, because the feedback looked pretty impressive. So well done, guys, for doing this so well without me. And yeah, make sure you get onto BigFooty. Let us know what you think of the podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback. And until next week, go the Power.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.